In a move that stunned the nation, King Charles has made a decision no one saw coming. He's abdicated the throne, ending his reign after just 3 years. The reason? Not scandal, not politics, but something far more personal and devastating. This is the emotional unraveling behind a king's final, unthinkable choice. The morning the monarchy broke. At 7:21 a.m., the monarchy changed forever. The royal household issued a statement without warning. King Charles has abdicated, effective immediately. 10 words, no context, no softening, just the end of a reign, mid-morning. The silence that followed was not peace, it was paralysis. BC anchors, trained for a monarch's death, activated crisis protocols meant for funerals, not living kings. Royal obituary footage aired by mistake. Sky News cut to a wide shot of Buckingham Palace, crowds forming within minutes. Across the gates, confusion turned quickly to disbelief. Some wept. A woman clutching her toddler whispered to reporters, "Kings don't quit. They reign till the end." The world reacted in real time. CNN flashed a red banner. "British King abdicates throne." The phrase echoed like fiction. But the cameras were real. So were the eyes of stunned royal watchers, blinking through what no one expected to see. Not since King Edward VIII, nearly 9 decades ago, had abdication been spoken in this context, and back then, it had ended in disgrace and exile. But this was different. There was no scandal, no forbidden romance, just a decision, clean and brutal. Inside royal circles, the news dropped like glass on stone. Diplomats weren't briefed. The Privy Council hadn't met. Even high-ranking palace staff found out through television. No one understood what had driven the king to leave the throne. Not yet. But across every newsfeed, one truth had already settled in. The monarchy was no longer in the hands of King Charles III. The crown, whether anyone was ready or not, was moving to Prince William. And in Windsor, the phone was already ringing. A father's call. William summoned alone. At 6:45 a.m., just 36 minutes before the public announcement, Prince William received a direct call from the king's aide. "Come to Windsor, alone." He left without waking Catherine or alerting staff. The phrasing was deliberate. No explanation, no context. He assumed the worst. A health emergency, a relapse, something medical, not a decision that would leave history rewritten. Inside a private study at Windsor Castle, he found King Charles already seated. On the table beside him were legal papers, bound in royal red, sealed with the sovereign crest. The king didn't waste time. He looked at William and said words that had not been heard by a direct heir in modern royal memory. "I'm abdicating." William didn't respond at first. His mind searched for protocol, for process, for explanation. None came. Only the sound of clocks ticking. He was told that the documents were complete, that the Prime Minister had been informed, that the Church would support the decision. Every constitutional step had been taken, except one. The son, now the heir, had not yet processed what this meant. He stepped away from the table and said what instinct told him to say, "You can't. We don't do that. Not since Edward. Not ever." But Charles didn't argue. He wasn't asking for permission. The weight in his face said this wasn't political. It was personal. Before William could protest further, Charles stood, handed him a folder, and turned away. In that moment, the son became something else. not yet a king, but no longer just an heir. The moment William feared most was no longer theoretical. The crown was moving toward him, not because of death, but because of choice. And behind that choice, something darker had already taken hold. The diagnosis that changed the crown. It began in fragments, almost invisible to the public eye, slurred words at the end of long days, notes repeated twice in the same briefing, unreadable marginal scribbles in state papers that Charles himself didn't seem to recognize the next day. At first, the palace staff blamed exhaustion. It had been a bruising few years. The death of his mother, the fracturing of the family, the endless scrutiny that came with a crown inherited late in life, and the burden of stepping into shoes still too sacred to fill. But by autumn, something shifted. What was once subtle became impossible to ignore. During a closed-door meeting with the Prime Minister, Charles paused mid-sentence for nearly 20 seconds, unable to recall a minister's name he had known for decades. The silence turned the air in the room cold. Staff exchanged glances, and the Prime Minister, unusually gentle, suggested a full evaluation. That evening, Charles didn't protest. For once, he agreed. Under the discreet care of Dr. James Morrison, one of Britain's foremost royal neurologists, the testing was done swiftly and quietly. The results left no room for misinterpretation. The cancer had metastasized to the brain, and it was progressing. The timeline was cruel. He had months, at best, of clear cognitive ability. After that, the decline would sharpen. Words would fade. Decisions would slip. Memory would falter. And the sovereign, the symbol of national continuity, would become visibly unmoored. The medical report was short, almost clinical in tone, but its final line felt like a blow to the chest. You will eventually require full-time care. The symptoms will become publicly visible. The process is irreversible. Charles said nothing at first. He read it twice, then laid it down, not with panic, not with tears, but with a kind of bone-deep stillness. He knew exactly what this meant. The monarchy had weathered scandal, war, protest, but it had never been built to survive confusion at the top. A king who forgets the oath he took, or the hand he shook, risks unraveling not just trust, but identity. His mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had reigned with lucidity until her final breath at 96. But Charles could already feel the fracture. His reign had lasted just over 3 years, and the crown, finally his after a lifetime of waiting, was slipping from his grasp faster than he could steady it. In the following days, Charles told no one outside his inner ring, not even William. He spoke only to Camilla, who saw it in his eyes before he spoke a word, and to Sir Clive Alderton, his private secretary, who began quietly preparing what hadn't been touched since 1936, a plan for abdication. He didn't want sympathy or spectacle. He wanted agency. A sovereign must know when to rise, but more importantly, when to step back. And so began the quietest, most consequential decision of his life: to become the first living monarch in modern Britain to surrender the throne. Not in disgrace, but with dignity. Not in death, but in fading light. The breaking point: a king who forgot his queen. Inside the private walls of Clarence House, something had changed. Subtle at first. A tightening of schedules. Fewer public engagements. Meetings shortened to 30 minutes, then 15. King Charles III had always been precise, driven by routine. But recently, there were lapses. Speeches delivered with stutters. Pauses that didn't feel like reflection, but disorientation. Staff noticed. His aides grew more careful with language, speaking slower, watching for signs. They stopped assuming continuity. Behind the heavy doors and heritage furniture, uncertainty had taken the throne. But the true collapse didn't come in public, not during a state banquet or televised address. It came in the quietest, most human place, a morning routine between husband and wife. Charles sat in his armchair, morning light filtering in through cream curtains, when Camilla entered with a folder of briefings. She spoke softly, her usual tone. But something was wrong. He didn't answer. He looked at her, not startled, not panicked, just blank, searching, then asked, "Who are you?" The words hung in the air like broken glass. She froze. The tone wasn't sharp. It wasn't aggressive. It was childlike, confused. He blinked several times, looked away, then back again. The episode lasted nearly 5 minutes. He couldn't follow the briefing. He asked again, quieter this time. She didn't correct him. She didn't cry. She sat beside him and held his hand. She knew this wasn't forgetfulness. This was disassociation, a sudden, cruel fracture between self and world. She had seen early signs, but this was undeniable. By noon, the fog lifted. Charles returned to his papers, resumed the day. But nothing was the same. That night, long after the corridors had emptied, he wandered the halls alone. He paused beneath a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, his mother, the monarch who never flinched, who reigned until her final breath at 96. He stood there a long time. No guards, no staff, just memory and the fear of losing it. He had ruled for just over 1,000 days. His reign, long awaited, was now being undone by the very mind he needed to preserve it. The next morning, in the stillness of their private quarters, he told Camilla he could feel it, his identity slipping in fragments. He described it not as pain, but as vanishing. He said if he remained on the throne, the country wouldn't just lose a king. They would watch him disappear, piece by piece, in real time. The guilt was unrelenting. His mother never faltered. The crown had meant permanence, but he was becoming something the crown couldn't carry. Unknowable. If he stayed, the monarchy risked becoming a symbol of decline, not strength. That single moment, asking his wife's name, became the breaking point. The crown could not wait for the final collapse. It had to be passed before the forgetting became irreversible. Later that week, behind locked doors, Charles summoned his most trusted legal advisors. The abdication papers, modeled after those last touched in 1936, were ordered into draft. He gave one instruction: I will leave before the country forgets who I am. And with that, the king stepped into history, not as a ruler fading from power, but as a man walking away from it, while he still could. The Palace in Crisis, Secret Meetings in Windsor. Inside Windsor Castle, the air was tense, not with scandal, but with urgency. Sir Clive Alderton, Charles's private secretary, convened a closed circle: constitutional scholars, royal legal counsel, trusted ministers. Their mobile phones were taken, doors sealed. Every attendee signed an oath of secrecy. The issue was unprecedented in modern monarchy. A king choosing to abdicate, not due to scandal, but due to mental deterioration. No one had protocol for this. They built it in real time. Princess Anne, seated near the king's chair, spoke with blunt force. She said what no one else wanted to admit. Her brother's condition was accelerating. Everyone in the room knew it. Avoiding the truth would only damage the institution. Some suggested a regency, a solution used historically when monarchs were unwell. Others feared public distrust. Would this make abdication easier for future monarchs? Would the crown lose its mystique? One advisor warned of precedent, another insisted on principle. But above all, Charles's decision stood untouched. He was not asking. He had made his choice. The legal team drafted a transition plan rooted in the 1936 framework, but without exile or disgrace. Charles would remain in Britain. He would keep his dignity. But he would no longer reign. Behind locked doors, they constructed a constitutional path through uncharted terrain. Outside, the public knew nothing. Inside, the countdown had already begun. William's silent rage. At Kensington Palace, William moved like a man under siege. As aides drafted succession schedules and ceremonial outlines, he sat in silence, arms crossed, jaw tight. His father was alive, still speaking, still present. And yet, the monarchy was already treating him as gone. A meeting with senior advisors broke him. They spoke clinically about Charles's decline, his windows of lucidity, his increasing absence in state matters. A communications strategist suggested they frame the abdication as a modern sacrifice, an act of noble surrender. William left the room and vomited. He wasn't ready to be king, not like this, not while his father was still walking palace halls and watching the news. He proposed a regency. Let Charles remain monarch in name, while William handled day-to-day duties. It had been done before, but Charles refused. He believed symbolic rule without clarity was dishonest. If his mind was vanishing, the title had to go with it. The rejection hit hard. William felt ambushed by history. The throne wasn't being passed. It was being dropped into his hands. That night, he didn't sleep. Catherine found him in the nursery, staring at the floor. George had asked why Grandpa had canceled their outing. William couldn't answer. In private, he grieved, not just for his father's mind, but for his own stolen future. The transition was no longer optional. The weight of the crown had begun to settle around his shoulders, heavy and unwelcome. The next phase would not wait. The final abdication, a crown laid down by choice. It happened behind closed doors at Windsor Castle, in a quiet chamber rarely used for state affairs. The time, just after 9 a.m., present were only a handful of figures: Prince William, Princess Anne, the Prime Minister, the Lord Chancellor, and 2 legal witnesses. All mobile devices had been surrendered. No photos, no recordings, just history unfolding in silence. Charles entered the room slowly. Earlier that morning, he had suffered another cognitive lapse, unable to recall the Foreign Secretary's name during a breakfast briefing. It was the 3rd such episode in a week. Still, in that moment, he was focused, clear enough to act. He was handed the same Montblanc pen he had used to sign his accession papers just 3 years earlier. Before him lay a folder bound in crimson leather, bearing the royal seal. Inside, the instrument of abdication, drawn up and vetted by constitutional lawyers, parliament leaders, and royal legal counsel. With shaking hands, King Charles III signed his name at the bottom of the page. His breathing slowed. His crown, passed to him late in life, had been set down by choice. He stood, turned to William, and spoke, voice low but unwavering. "You are king. I am not." William didn't respond, not at first. He looked at the document, final, binding, and utterly irreversible. The Lord Chancellor nodded. The transfer was now official. The last time a monarch had abdicated, it had ended in scandal and exile. But this was different. There was no disgrace, no love story. Just a man surrendering power before illness took it from him anyway. Within the hour, senior courtiers began informing the government. The public would be told by noon. And William, now King William V, stood motionless. The weight of his father's decision had become real. A nation reels. Parliament's historic emergency session. By 12:30 p.m., both houses of Parliament were in session under emergency order. The Prime Minister stood before the Commons holding a printed copy of the King's abdication. In calm, deliberate language, he explained the unprecedented decision. Charles had not been removed. He had stepped down with full authority, advised by doctors, ministers, and family. The chamber was silent. Then murmurs. Then emotion. An enabling act, the Royal Succession Transition Bill, was tabled and fast-tracked. It passed both the Commons and the Lords within 5 hours. Not since World War II had Parliament moved with such coordinated urgency. The Prime Minister's words echoed across the country. This was not abdication by weakness. It was the King's final act of duty. Several MPs were seen wiping tears from their eyes. Others looked stunned, still processing the scale of what had occurred. Polls released that evening showed a divided but sympathetic public. 52% called the abdication honorable. Only 11% viewed it as destabilizing. Across Britain, public landmarks dimmed their lights in recognition, not of a death, but of a sovereign's departure. At Buckingham Palace, flags remained at full mast, but the mood was unmistakably somber. People gathered again at the gates, staring through the bars toward an empty balcony. What followed next would seal the transition not just in law, but in image. The accession of William V, a crown too soon. At 10 a.m., behind the sealed gates of St. James's Palace, the future became the present. The halls that once hosted centuries of coronation rituals now held something quieter, something heavier. Inside, the Accession Council gathered. Former prime ministers, religious leaders, senior royals, and state officials. No cameras were allowed. No news outlets invited. The walls of that chamber had seen history written before, but never like this. Prince William entered without ceremony. Dressed in a black suit, not the regal robes of joy, he moved like a man walking toward obligation, not elevation. The air was thick with silence, acknowledgement of what had been lost, not gained. There were no trumpets, no choirs, only the sound of his footsteps across the polished floor, each one echoing the truth. He was now king. He stood before the council and read from a brief statement, pre-written by aides, but reviewed by his own hand that morning. It was short, clear, and deeply personal. I am grateful for my father's example. I will serve with the devotion this crown demands. Then came the pen, the same one used to sign royal orders, oaths, declarations. With measured care, William signed the proclamation of accession. His name flowed steadily onto the parchment. William V, by the grace of God, King of the United Kingdom. There was no applause, no nod of approval, just the solemn understanding that the crown had passed. Not through death, but through resignation. Outside, across London, a single gun salute echoed through the gray skies. No cheering, no parade, just stillness. It wasn't mourning, but it wasn't celebration either. At Kensington Palace, Catherine remained with the children. The world had shifted, but within their walls, quiet questions filled the rooms. George, now heir to the throne, had been told. His expression was blank, thoughtful, beyond his years. Charlotte watched the television in silence, fingers curled in her lap. Louis, youngest and untouched by duty, simply asked why Grandpa wasn't wearing the crown anymore. At St. James's, Princess Anne stood at William's side. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence, unmoving, absolute, was her statement. One generation holding the next in place. For William, this was not ascension. It was inheritance in its most brutal form. The crown hadn't been passed like a torch. It had been lowered onto his shoulders, still warm from the man who had just worn it. He had dreamed of more time, a future where his children were older, where the weight could be shared, where his father would step back gradually. But the timeline had been rewritten by illness and necessity. Britain had a new king, and he, in return, had inherited a 1,000-year legacy in a single morning. Now, with the title etched into history, he stood not as a man crowned, but as a man beginning to learn how to breathe beneath it. The quiet that follows power. Night fell over Windsor, not with ceremony, but with stillness. The cameras had pulled back. The documents were signed. The councils had met. The crown, once passed from a mother to a son, had now moved from a father still breathing to a son still grieving. King William V spent his first evening not in celebration, but in solitude. The royal box of state papers had arrived. He opened it, stared at its contents, then closed it without a word. He would return to it later. For now, he simply sat. Down the hall, Charles, no longer His Majesty, had returned to his study. No courtiers stood at attention. No schedule awaited him. Just a single note from his staff confirming his withdrawal from public life. The monarchy had moved on. But Charles was still present. He removed his signet ring, folded his last briefing, and left behind the final sentence he had said to William, one that would echo in his son's mind for years. "The crown is heavy, but it is a privilege." No crowds gathered that night, no balcony wave, no anthem, just a nation adjusting to an act never seen before, a monarch stepping aside and watching the world go on without him. At Kensington Palace, Catherine ensured the children were shielded from the noise. George had gone quiet. Charlotte wrote a letter to her grandfather. Louis slept, not knowing his world had changed. The final palace statement was issued at 9 p.m. It read, "His Majesty King William V has assumed the throne. The nation expresses gratitude to His Majesty King Charles III for his years of service. The crown endures, by duty and by choice. There was no portrait unveiling, no anthemic crescendo, just that line, by duty and by choice." Across the country, people stood still, not out of shock, but out of understanding. A king had chosen conscience over ceremony, and his son had taken the throne not through death, but through quiet sacrifice. In the end, it wasn't illness that brought down the reign. It was clarity, a moment of fading recognition, a forgotten name in a familiar face. That was the line Charles could not cross. And so the curtain lowered not on a monarch's death, but on a monarch's final decision to be remembered as whole. A man returned to silence. A son rose into history. And a nation, still stunned, stood between goodbye and God Save the King. Britain now begins a new chapter under King William V, as the monarchy grapples with a decision that rewrote tradition. King Charles didn't leave in disgrace. He left with dignity, before time could take that from him. A legacy redefined, a crown passed in sorrow, and a history changed forever.